Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tinker Talks. Today, we are here to talk about energy. Have you ever opened your electric bill or your water bill and thought, wow, that is a really, really high bill this month? Well, imagine what it's like opening an electric bill at the Oklahoma City Air Logistics Complex or Tinker Air Force Base, for that matter. Can you imagine what that bill looks like and how much that would throw you into a panic? Well, today we're actually here to sit down and talk with the gentleman that has the responsibility of managing the energy usage consumption here at the Oklahoma City Air Logistics Complex. He is the energy manager, Joseph Cecrle. So, sir, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure. It's great to be with you guys.
Awesome. So, before we jump in and start talking all things energy, usage, consumption, and saving, if you could just kind of give the listeners a 200-word breakdown about who you are and how you got to this point.
Yeah, I've actually worked as a civilian out here at Tinker for 27 years. So first for 15 years of my career out here were over in what is now civil engineering. Environmental restoration was a focus area that I spent over there, and came over to the depot operations, or the what's now the complex, 12 years ago. Got involved in some industrial process improvements, kind of industrial engineering. And 7 years ago, when General Bruce Litchfield was here, his high interest in Tinker being the number one energy-consuming Air Force base pushed my management into dedicating me full-time to doing energy management for the complex.
Okay, why you specifically? Was this a passion of yours?
Well, at the time, the squadron that I was over touched a lot of aspects of our business that consume energy, managing facilities, industrial plant equipment, and other aspects of the business that, interestingly enough, tied back to civil engineering, which was my previous career connection here at Tinker. And I did not have any full-time staff doing any sort of engineering or analysis of our energy and utility consumption. And so I was personally spending more and more of my time in that area. And so my director saw the interest. At the time, General Litchfield brought in the Secretary of Energy for the state of Oklahoma, Secretary of Commerce, chief executive officers from our utility providers. So he was being very serious about that. And my director decided that it was my job to do that full time, and he brought somebody else to take over the squadron that I was running.
Okay, awesome. So it's a very big responsibility, obviously, especially as we'll get into in a minute. The actual complex that you oversee isn't Tinker Air Force Base, but you are the largest complex of its kind, I believe, in the Air Force, and the largest energy consumer on the installation. So obviously, a lot of the heavy lifting in energy usage, consumption, and saving falls on your shoulders and your team's shoulders. But could you tell me exactly what your team does here at Tinker, as far as how does this all flow together, like the energy? And I know you partner with outside entities also, but your team specifically here at Tinker, what do you guys do on a day-to-day basis?
So on a day-to-day basis, the team is looking at opportunities for saving energy. Right now, that opportunity is a huge contract we've got, an energy savings performance contract. It's about $250 million worth of construction that's ongoing right now. Wow. Last week, a couple of big milestones. We crossed over about 91% completion of that project. So a lot of our activities are around contract management, contract oversight, program management in that. But on Saturday this week, we shut down the central steam plant here in Building 3001 that had been in operation since the building was built back in the 1940s, 42, 43. One time that facility, that steam plant, was powering 10 buildings in this area of a company, this area of the base in recent history. But on Saturday, we turned that plant off. So a lot of our activities are consumed around construction activities in buildings where we've got active production. So avoiding impacts to production, coordinating with shops, coordinating with a whole series of contractors, subcontractors, and in order to make that successful. So a lot of our time is contract management. We do have one of our members is really dedicated on an energy management system that we have in place. That's a people management system, not a computer system.
Right.
And so it's working with the production groups. They're the ones that own the processes. They're the ones that know how to operate those processes. So we work with production groups on that. Those are the most time-consuming. We do analysis of our utility bills. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Fiscal year 19, I don't have the final bills yet, but we should end the year somewhere $20 to $21 million for our utilities as an organization.
Wow.
If you roll back the clock, back to FY12, you were talking about us being number one. The bill was averaging about $31 million back at that point. So we've made a lot of progress in terms of cost control,
Right.
but also in energy consumption, made dramatic reductions in our energy consumption.
That is incredible. $21 million. Well, that sure make me feel better when I open my $100 electric bill next month. So before we move on, the plant that you guys just closed, that's closed for good.
That plant, those steam boilers, that steam system will not be fired back up. That's correct.
Okay. And so how do you project what sort of energy savings will that produce a pretty significant?
So it will be very significant. That activity of shutting those boilers off was one of the what they call energy conservation measures, one of the activities we did in this big contract I mentioned a moment ago. And so that's a big, important milestone for the project. That project awarded in December of 2016.
Wow.
And so here we are almost 3 years later. It's got a 3.5-year construction period. So that was a big milestone to get all the buildings off, because steam was used both in this building 3001, and in other facilities, both for heating the facilities during the winter, but also for industrial processes.
Right.
So we've gone through all those facilities and put in dedicated systems to processes. For building heat, mostly it's gone to natural gas. In some cases, hot water is used to heat the facilities, or infrared heaters, like you might see if you're familiar with a warehouse or some sort of operation where you see the kind of glowing tubes.
Right.
Those infrared tubes, we've put in that heat in a lot of our facilities. So we've addressed facility heat in one aspect, but on industrial processes, there's some of the processes require steam. And for those processes, we have installed boilers that are specific to that process, with process redundancy and close to those processes, so that if we have a problem with a steam system, it's affecting a single process. Historically, this steam system, which was quite old, if it went down, we lost every process that required steam and heat to 10 buildings. I mean, it was very, very disruptive to operations if something happened to that central steam plant. So we've now increased our resiliency by distributing that. So if we have a challenge with any one single system, it affects that one small area and not our entire operations.
Right. Well, that's smart thinking for sure. And just to give our listeners an idea, do you know how many buildings or what kind of square footage we're talking about here?
So the complex is in around 60 buildings, depending on how small of the structure you want to call a building.
Right.
And we occupy a little over 8 million square feet.
Wow.
As an organization. Now, in this energy project I was talking to you about, it is worked in conjunction with civil engineering. We touched more square footage than that. For example, in LED lights that we've installed in the project, we actually installed about 10 million square feet of LED lighting.
Wow.
And that's because some of our larger buildings are occupied by organizations other than just the complex. And so in an effort to do facility-wide changes, if we went into a building and started changing the lighting, we changed all the lighting in the facility rather than just the depot operations.
Right. And it takes a lot to run these buildings. I mean, they're huge, they're very tall, and when people leave at night, I mean, the work goes on 24/7 every day of the year, so nobody's just turning off the light switch when they walk out the door at night. So there's
Not
a lot
always.
here to keep going.
We are getting better at that. That if we do have a single shift or maybe just two shifts, if you either come in early enough or stay late enough, we are doing a better job of getting some equipment and lights turned off when they're just not needed in an area.
Good. So Tinker is massive. You know, there's 5,400. I believe 5,400 acres here out on Tinker.
And growing, I believe, if you include the new areas of our campus.
That is true. It is growing. So when you guys sit down and listen to General Litchfield say, hey, I need you to get your arms around this and handle it and reduce it. I mean, when you first started out, what do you and your team do to even take on a daunting task like that?
So that brings back some memories. So, you know, General Litchfield's retired, right? He's moved on from being, in fact, he was our, at the time it was a wing, but he was, you know, the complex commander and moved to the Air Force Sustainment Center commander position before he retired. But when he first started, they brought in some industry specialists to look at some of our organizations. They looked at our industrial processes primarily. The very first project that was of any size that came out of that was actually the what we call the Tinker Aerospace Complex, or TAC,
right?
The old General Motors plant,
9001,
building 9001, right? And in that case, the opportunity, the first opportunity we went after were the steam boilers that were at that plant. Now, General Motors had a very different kind of operations than what we, the Air Force, have, and they had some boilers that had originally been coal-fired. They had been converted over to natural gas some number of years ago, but they were very aged, and we were bleeding out cash trying to keep the things running. They also produced steam, and we were not using steam anywhere. The steam was being converted to hot water, and then hot water was being used to heat the building. And so we saw an opportunity to go to just straight up generating hot water to heat the facility. And that was the first project. Projects take a long time. If you do any sort of federal contracting, federal projects, they just take a lot of effort just from a contractual standpoint. A lot of regulations on how you do contracts. That project was so painful. It was successful, but it was so painful that when I looked around and said, what are you doing next? I said, we're doing it all. And that resulted in the large project that we're currently doing. Doing it small project by small project, I felt like was too painful at the time.
Right.
I didn't realize how hard a large project was going to be, but we will go back to doing smaller projects. We've actually recently started some smaller projects even before we got this big one done, but that was actually the first project that we did, was down there in General Motors as a complex. Now, the base had done some things before that in getting rid of some, actually it was focused on old steam plants that the base had focused on. And we followed in kind, I guess you would say.
Right. Awesome. So as we talked about earlier, Tinker had been previously the #1 energy consumption base in the Air Force.
Correct.
I think at last we heard we're now number 4.
We are number 4. It's going to be a stretch to get to position 5. Tinker is a large installation, and we're a large industrial installation. Our organization, somewhere between 60 and 70% of all energy used at Tinker is used in the Air Logistics Complex. My organization, we've got 10,000 employees, a little over that, and growing missions, right?
Yep.
So as that largest consumer, the activities that we did, I mentioned a project where we'd gotten rid of some older boilers down at the Building 9001, that facility. Just over the past 3 years, we have seen during construction, as we complete things, our energy consumption is dropping significantly over time, almost on a monthly basis. You can see it.
Wow, that's incredible. So, is it the industrial complexes that drive so much energy here? Does it take that much to run these big buildings?
I'll illustrate some of the processes that are so energy intensive. We paint whole up aircraft, right? So I don't know if you've ever had a car painted or seen somebody does some sort of a paint facility, but you have to have fresh air, right, to bring in. We've got buildings, aircraft hangars, that we pull an aircraft in and we paint the entire aircraft. Well, in doing so, we're bringing in outside air, and we're either heating or cooling it to around 72 degrees, around 50% humidity, and then it gets blown out the other side of the building.
Right.
These buildings, I mean, you're moving a lot of air when you do that. So if it's hot or cold outside, if it's not 72 degrees outside, we are going to either be heating or cooling that air that goes through those paint operations. Right. We have plating operations that put metal on parts as we're refurbishing parts. Those tanks have to be very hot. It's one of the processes that uses steam. We clean jet engine parts. As you can imagine, those parts get very dirty, and so there's chemical processes in heated tanks, again, that require steam that we use as part of those processes. So we have a lot of industrial processes that are just very energy intensive.
Right. And you have to heat those planes also when they're drying, right?
That's correct. They do raise the temperature in the paint facilities when they're curing the paint on the aircraft.
Right. So some of the long range workloads, I'm assuming that you guys will own the hangars where the KC-46 sustainment
correct.
campus is
That's
going.
Right. Those will be.
And then the B-21, looking further downrange, you guys will own that too, because that'll be part of the
depot
workload and
right.
depot maintenance. So looking downrange at these huge workloads coming here, how do you guys, or are you even trying right now to project how you can keep the energy costs at a minimum as much as you can before these things are even built?
So yes, we are, and that gets into an area that's well beyond just me. The Corps of Engineers does all military construction projects for
right.
the Air Force, and as a part of their design process, they look at energy consumption of a facility and look into energy efficiencies for those facilities. So. That happens not just by somebody like myself, but
right.
whole teams of people look at how a building is going to use energy during its design phase. Where I touch it is in a couple of places. One is, as a part of what we're doing, is we're trying to have more information about how our facilities operate. So we have expanded what's called a building management system. You might have a Nest doorbell, or you might have a Nest thermostat or something for your house, where you can pull up your phone and see who's at your door, or change the temperature in your house.
Right.
We aren't doing that with our facilities. You're not going to pull them up on your cell phone. However, we do have a campus-wide facility management system, or building management system, that we are building out that allows us to monitor how those facilities are being run. So not just in design of the facilities, but in operation of those facilities, we're putting infrastructure in place to monitor how the facilities are operating, so we can make sure that we're operating them efficiency. An example would be, we talked about painting aircraft. The goal would be that, as you mentioned, where you cure the paint at a certain temperature and that kind of stuff. The goal would be that I'm operating the building in the mode that it needs to be in for production. So if I need to be curing paint, then I've got it in some kind of cure mode. If I'm painting, I've got it in some kind of a paint mode. If I'm not doing anything, or I've gone home for the weekend or whatever, the building shouldn't be just left running,
right.
but it should be in whatever the appropriate mode is for that facility. So we're making progress on that, but that involves people.
Right.
Not mechanical systems, right? That involves people doing the right kinds of things. And that's where our management system, I told you earlier, that we've got involves the people side of things beyond just the mechanical systems.
Mm-hmm. Good. And probably at one point in time, we just didn't really give a lot of thought to this type of energy and what we were consuming. I mean, I'm sure it's always been a factor when the bills get opened and the bill has to be paid, but it really seems like we're doing a very good job at making sure that we're being good stewards of of a lot of things, of the energy consumption, what that's going to look like to the country and the world long term, our taxpayers. So it's good stuff. It's and you guys are making some really great strides. So what does an initiative like Art of the Possible in cases like this? Do you guys use Art of the Possible in your area?
So yes, we do.
Okay.
For those that aren't familiar, it's Art of the Possible describes doing continuous improvement in whatever process you're doing. So that's the Air Force Sustainment Center's philosophy of making sure you're doing processes better and better over time.
Right.
So our organization's, my team's answer to that specifically really falls under an international standard.
Mm-hmm.
There's an international standard for managing energy. It's ISO 50001.
Mm-hmm.
And our organization, Oklahoma City Air Logistics Complex, was the first federal organization to get certified under that standard. And in that standard, it's a very disciplined plan. You're planning activities, you're doing activities, you're checking how they're doing. So that in this plan, do, check, act, you're continually cycling through how you use energy and why you use energy, and making plans to use it more efficiently.
Right.
And so under that Art of the Possible, we're using this ISO structure to enable us to continuously improve what our energy performance looks like over time. And it involves all sorts of things. There is energy awareness. Every new employee to the complex, as a part of their new employee orientation, there's an energy section that we've inserted into that. For areas that we refer to as significant energy uses, those employees are aware that their process is a significant energy use, and there's some additional training that's associated with both the operations and the maintenance of those areas of our business. And then the most senior leadership of our organization oversees, they set the policy for the organization, and we report to them on a recurring basis on how the organization is performing.
Okay, awesome. That's good. Art of the Possible really fits well into this category.
Absolutely.
For sure. And when you talked about the achieving the ISO 50001 certification, so I think that happened in 2016.
That's
Is that
correct.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about specifically what that ISO 50001 is, and how it was that we got involved and got to the certification, especially to be the first federal organization? That's a pretty great feat for us here at Tinker.
Right. One, I'm going to confess that I stole the idea of pursuing a certification from some folks at Robins Air Force Base.
Okay.
But I looked at the information I had been given 7 years ago when I started doing energy management. We've always paid utility bill, and so I had records of utility bills and records of some various kinds of things we had done in the past to improve energy performance. And it was very clear that it had become very personality driven as to if somebody was assigned to doing it full time, or maybe it was something their management was asking about, then we would push the organization to do some sort of improvements, and then that person would move on, or maybe the management would change, and it would just go back to business as usual. And I did not want that to happen when I leave this job and either retire or go to some other job. I did not want the organization sliding back into a position of, well, I don't get the utility bill, I just paint the airplane, or I don't get the utility bill, I just do whatever activity that I do. And to keep that awareness and that momentum in place perpetually, and viewed the standard because it is the policy is written by the commander.
Right.
Regular updates are given to the commander. The employees are trained, and we have third-party auditors that come in and check on us to see that are we really doing those activities, or are we just putting a check in a box somewhere and claiming that we're doing those activities. And so I viewed it as a sustainment. You talk about Art of the Possible, and that's part of the whole scheme of Art of the Possible, right? It doesn't matter if a commander changes out or employees change out, that process will continue to get better over time. And so I viewed that as a way of keeping the organization on the right track over the long haul. There is some effort involved in that, and so I included that effort in the large energy project I told you about. And so the costs of that effort are offset by the energy and operational and maintenance savings that the project brings, and so it's just baked into the cost of the project in terms of those external costs that come with that certification. So I know that we will keep doing the right thing even after I move away from this job.
Good. So how long did it take to achieve that certification?
We worked toward that goal for about 1.5 years, if memory serves correct.
Wow. So this was not just a 1 month and
no,
stamp
definitely
certified.
not a 1 month and a stamp certification. Way too much involved in making sure that the organization really understands the how and why of its energy use,
right.
and that that senior management is given information about that and given the opportunity to redirect the organization in another way, to make changes, to provide. In fact, the standard says that the management has to provide resources
right.
to the energy management team. And those resources can come in the form of people or money, or sometimes it's just political top cover. Many of the things we have done in the energy management office have been painful for the organization to go through. I've got one of our paint docks shut down. It's been shut down for about 7 months now, and it won't be back up until the end of December because we're completely refurbishing the way that paint dock operates.
Right.
But it'll use about 70% less energy when we're done. So there's a big benefit, and be more reliable. It's a facility that we've had trouble with. But that's very painful for an organization. And without top-level leadership, an organization really will not find the motivation to go through extremely painful processes to get to that goal on the other side. And this management system has got the top-level leadership supporting those activities, that when they see that there is a business case in dollars and in efficiencies for the organization, then they endorse it, and we can move out on those.
And that's good. That the transparency is critical, even if it's painful when you're having to be the one to stand there and produce that and let the leadership know that there's a real problem here. But great long-term thinking, though. That's, you're gonna take that scab on the knee today, but it's gonna heal much better going long-term. So October is Energy Action Month, I believe, across the Air Force and the Department of Defense, the DoD. Are you guys doing anything specifically here? Any types of activities? I'm assuming, you're already well engaged in saving energy and dialing back and consuming. But are you doing some sort of awareness for the base or any projects?
So the base is doing some activities. I believe they're going to be at the BX here on the facility during the month of October for general population awareness. As a part of the management system, we do push out awareness communications on a regular basis that make it all the way down to the shop floor. So we do messaging all year long within the organization. I do actually have some training this month for the facility management system I was telling you about. We've got a trainer on site this week and next. Again, trying to enable people to use some of the systems we've been in place for the goal of improving our energy performance. So the base is doing some stuff. We're doing some small stuff. We're not doing anything really big. In some past years, we have done some energy expos where we've brought in contractors and made available to the general population some trinkets, giveaways, but really some exposure to some of the specific activities we're doing. But I believe OG&E and some others will be over at the BX with the base energy office as part of their activities this month.
Great. So you're so excited and passionate about this job and about saving energy. It shows, it oozes out of you.
I got the best job at Tinker.
Right. I was just saying, what keeps you so excited about this? Because to some people, this may seem like, oh my gosh, are you kidding?
So there's the why. There's a couple of a couple of whys the job excites me. I mentioned the financial side, and that is, for me as a taxpayer, that is a big reason. Is why when I see us wasting energy, and like I said, a $30 million energy bill, or even currently a $20 million annual bill, is still a lot of money, and I know we can still improve on that. We've got stuff in place to keep that going down. So part of the why is back to the taxpayer, of making efficient use of their money, so we're not just wasting. I don't know anybody that deliberately leaves all the doors on their house open while they're heating and cooling the house year round. And so I don't want Tinker to be a place where you come and see the doors wide open year round when we're heating and cooling a building, as an example. So that's part of the why. Another part of the why is it does go back to my environmental days. Energy, you mentioned energy security is a global thing. The U.S. government is the largest energy consumer in the United States. The Department of Defense is the largest government agency, and the Air Force in turn uses the most energy within the Department of Defense. So anything that we as the Air Force do to lower our energy consumption makes the world a better place, not just from the fact that pollution's generated from using energy, but even from a security standpoint, that it puts less demand on an energy as a resource. So that is also part of the why. And not to belittle, I do have kids, and so they need a world to live in that both has energy available and clean air to breathe, all that kind of stuff. So those are some of the reasons why I get really passionate about this.
That's amazing. Well, I think that's an excellent place to leave off at. We really appreciate you, Mr. Cecrle, sitting down and taking some time with us today to talk about an extremely not so much talked about topic, but an extremely important one, as we just got to. And so with that, we're going to leave you. Thanks for joining us again here on Tinker Talks. Please look us up on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Tinker Air Force Base, and Instagram at Tinker Air Force Base, and on Twitter you can find us at team_Tinker, and also look us up on the web. We have a website at www.tinker.af.mil. And until next time, hope you all have a great day and a great week.